resolution as well. I think India at the UN Human Rights Council, I think India is consciously trying to make a neutral position here because of the perceptions which are emerging even in the media, or I think seemingly sometimes one-sided or seemingly very Western driven. I think it's very important to go back to the entire, causes behind the very crisis which is looming at large. For us, I think from a humanitarian perspective, again, from the at the outset, we may have a perception that any kind of military intervention into another sovereign country is violation to the principles of the international law, particularly the UN Charter, which does not allow any country to unduly any other country to enter into another country. So this we understand, that is something which we take note of. But what is the real reason? Is it something that one fine day Russia felt that they want to go and intervene or invade or enter into Ukraine? Or is it something brewing? I think number one, I think let us take note of the fact that this problem is very much embedded in the culture, history, geopolitics of the region. We all know that how Ukraine became part of the former Soviet Union structure, which prevailed from 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, and they were very much part of the larger Soviet regime, which continued till 1991 when they broke. They agreed to form separate independent states known as the Commonwealth of Independent States. And that's how they formed into peaceful, sovereign, independent republics. That's kind of a backdrop. But post 1991, there were several developments. I think one of them most importantly, I think, is in 2014 as a backdrop to the present crisis, that you have some of the territories within Ukraine which has sizable number of ethnic Russian population or a Russian speaking population. So Donbas, for example, which is east of Ukraine, bordering Russia, I think has been one territory with contestation. The fact that the Donbas had a Russian-speaking population and Ukraine had used some kind of an use of force to, suppress their voices has been one kind of a backdrop which culminated into a Minsk agreement, the capital of present-day Belarus. The Minsk agreement was something very important, that there was the tripartite, that is the Russian Federation, you have the Ukraine, you have the European, Western European representatives represented through a body called OSCE, that's Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. This is a kind of a tripartite agreement being made that the issues will be resolved. There will not be any use of force, nor any need for Russia to intervene, and Ukraine will sort out the problem, and Ukraine also in turn will give a guarantee that they will not become part of any military or a security pact. Most notably here, the context, as we all know, it is NATO. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is the bone of contention because of the fact that the NATO wants to expand into Ukraine and other countries bordering Russia. Russia definitely feels that it is a threat to its very existence, threat to its security, threat to the changing balance of power in the region, change to the very equilibrium. I think that we need to take note of. That is the contention. So there was an understanding given by Ukraine that they will not join NATO. That is part of the Minsk agreement in 2014. Now, from 2014 to 2022, the trajectories have been changing, and perhaps Ukraine is trying to become very ambitious to join European Union, join NATO, secure itself, want to be independent. But I think here we need to take a note of a fact that the West, particularly led by United States, seems to have kind of pushed a lot on Ukraine that they should openly, dissent against the Russian Federation. I think they have kind of disturbed the very equilibrium which probably might have prevailed. For me, to my mind, this is an important thing which has shaken the very power equations or the very equilibrium. On one side, we may argue that a sovereign independent state can decide whatever they want. For example, now we are talking about the referendum that the Ukrainians have given a referendum that, let Ukraine join NATO. They have a freedom. Yes, at one point, at one level, we may argue that a sovereign nation state has its own freedom to choose the path they want, whom to make as friends, which pact or alliance they want to do. The other is also a context of history, that Ukraine has never been always an independent country, had been part and parcel of either the Russian Tsar regime or the post-1917. They have been part of the Russian Soviet Union in a way. So these are all a backdrop that they need to also maintain that kind of reciprocation, respecting the big neighbor, Russia, and so on and so forth. That is also a context which is also needed. But that doesn't mean that the Ukraine has violated certain agreements made in the Minsk agreement or so, or whatever irritation. That doesn't mean that Russia has all the right to get into another country and use force to create this crisis. And this crisis has very many ramifications of the fact that on they have entered. So we will come to that. So if you look at if I may just share the screen if possible, I just thought maybe I can show a few slides which I've just prepared. I can come. Is my slide visible?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So this is something I feel that the regional geopolitics, the balance of power and equilibrium, which I'm saying, which got disturbed, is something as a context we should remember. But we also take a position that use of force is not the solution. Conflict or warfare is not the solution. We have evolved much, much more from the World War experiences, the two World Wars. And the Cold War period, again, has provided enormous lessons for us that not to go for a war. So it also seemed that, in the post-Cold War context, that the wars have shifted from interstate conflict to more of intrastate conflict. More of internal conflicts were more visible. But I think in the recent times, what have happened in, Armenia, Azerbaijan conflict in the very region, what we call the Eurasian region, connecting Europe and Asia, they call it Eurasian region, is in itself a matter of concern. Fortunately, it got settled. Then there was an uprising in Kazakhstan, which again got settled. And you have this region becoming volatile. We all remember that Russian Federation within had the Chechen crisis for a very long time. That was put down, and then probably that again got sorted out internally. But the world looked like we are moving into more of intrastate conflict. By and large, it seemed as a surprise that this very Ukrainian conflict has revived the challenges emanating from the interstate conflict, that is conflict between two or more states. So now you have entirely a situation of Russia as a very big power in that particular region, trying to intervene into Ukraine and forcefully telling Ukraine that we are going to kind of teach a lesson because they have not complied with the agreements being made earlier, number one. Number two, the Russia also claims the context that it is a humanitarian intervention, quote unquote, in their own words, that they have gone into intervene. Of the fact that this Donbas region, the Russian-speaking ethnic groups, Russian-speaking population have been disturbed, and few in thousands have marched into Russia very quietly, and that reason that they have to intervene and resolve. That is their own perspective, again, which we need to take note of, which doesn't come into the media. The third element is, of course, how then one sees this present bombardment by Russia into many of the cities, be it Kyiv or other key installations after taking over Chernobyl, the next nuclear installation they have taken over yesterday. And there's an enormous pressure on how what will happen. Is it that one by one city they're going to capture? You have a very dissenting president of Ukraine going into the bunkers, Vladimir Zelensky, and he's trying to kind of give a message that, he's not going to comply to Russia, rather he wants the world to support him and then go. We salute his resilience. We salute his leadership, the kind of people Ukrainians are, the way they are trying to defend against a big power is something quite amazing. That also we need to take note of. So how do you look at it? The contours are changing now in the realm of migration, forced migration, because of conflicts, even developmental issues, disasters. We all are aware of those things on one side. Just a moment, please. Hello. Hello, sir. Our meeting, sorry. So therefore, these are in a way. So the global conflicts and wars are making it very complex. We all are aware that post Cold War era, 90s, we thought that the conflicts will now decline, and the migration movement will probably be within the borders of a country. So there may not be much need of refugee protection, but it is turning other way around. We all know also how just before the Ukrainian crisis, the Arab Spring had brought in an enormous challenge. The Arab Spring, starting from Egypt, Libya, Algeria, finally culminated into Syria. And we know that how Syrian conflict broke down for the last almost 8 to 10 years and severely have challenged the humanitarian outpouring into Turkey, into Lebanon, and many countries. That is also context we understand, and it looked at tremendous pressure. But now the Ukrainian crisis again seemingly trying to change the global security paradigms, humanitarian paradigms, issues of sovereignty, issues of collective security, what is the role of UN, General Assembly, Security Council, what are the humanitarian needs. We are trying to look. We are aware again, in the past that 9/11 had altered the security paradigm quite a lot. So then the West Asian crisis, post-Arab Spring impact, then situations in Syria, Central Asian Republic, South Sudan, Yemen, Myanmar, Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict, to name a few, continue to be the flashpoints. We also have the challenges emerging from climate disasters globally, which we take care of them. We understand them in a way which are important. This very forum, I'm aware that focuses extensively on climate disaster management issues and all that. So now, how do we look at the Ukrainian crisis? How it is going to also impact the already overwhelmed humanitarian agencies and the role? Something we need to see. Just to give us statistics very briefly, if you look at the forced migration statistics given by UNHCR as a source, the latest report indicated that there are nearly about 82.4 million people affected. That is almost 4-5 months old, I'm telling you, late 2021. So you look at 22, now you can straight away add 1 million now. I marked it in the red due to the Ukrainian crisis. So already it has been reported that 10 lakh people have been displaced, more officially in a way, the count by UNHCR. So 82.4, it has become straight away 83.4 or even up to 85. We don't know. There are a lot of unaccounted movements. So the refugee population earlier was 26.4. We can add 1 million in that. Internal displacement, we don't know the scale. Earlier official numbers of 48. We can straight away add 5 to 8 million now. The stateless population, 5.62, 10.2 million was UN estimates, that's still estimating it. But now we can very well make out if Ukraine gets fully occupied, what happens to the status of the people? Can they still be called the Ukrainian national? Or if it is occupied by Russia, they can as well become entire population as a stateless people. Where do they go? What happens? How long the conflict will continue? We don't know. Then the asylum seeking options. As of now, the interesting part is in this humanitarian thing, with UN role perhaps as a backdrop, the 1951 convention as a backdrop relating to the refugee asylum seeking. I think perhaps that has worked very well and good preparations were made. It is good to see in this crisis certain good humanitarian gestures, what I call good humanitarian practices have also emerged. Now, for example, there are many countries in the neighborhood who have agreed to host them, agreed to receive them, which is a good sign. Imagine if they close the doors. Where will the Ukrainians go? Where will the foreign nationals go? Where would have even the Indian students gone? So even from the eyes of Indian students, we look at the Ukrainian crisis. How much of pressure, how much of a thing. If they are undergoing that much of pressure, what happens to the common people again? Now, there again, there are informations about variations. The Ukrainians are given priority, and then, probably the Asians, including the Chinese and Indian students, are not given that kind of a priority. Perhaps these are all relating also to the voting pattern which have happened, and the Ukrainians are quite unhappy that India did not vote in favor of the resolution to condemn Russia. So I think that is also context which is infringing on these kind of humanitarian movement, humanitarian safety and all that, I think, which we need to take into account. So you have this Ukrainian crisis, which is linked to the ongoing refugee crisis, where large number of people are trying to flee from the cities and other places to go out of Ukraine, knowing very well that the Ukrainian conflict is going to escalate. So it all began with the intervention of Russia. I'm consciously avoiding the word invasion because that also has a connotation. And the intervention of Russian troops starting from 24th February 2022. Now, several European countries were already preparing to take refugees, and especially Poland was ready to take almost 1 million population. There are hundreds and thousands who are fleeing as the attack started. As most of the refugees are today of Ukraine, such as Poland, Hungary, Moldova, Romania.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the captain speaking. Welcome on board. For departure, hope you settled down as well. If not, please do so at the earliest. Should be pushing back any minute now, waiting for air traffic details. Once you get airborne, we expect a flying time of 1 hour 5 minutes.
Hello. Is there any kind of audio interruption?
Yeah, that was Mr. Michael's phone was on, but he has muted it now. Sorry.
Okay,
sorry about
right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I thought somebody is speaking from the forum organizing side. Okay, thank you. So let me continue that. Many of those affected are seeking refuge, from their friends, relatives, and whatever they could make out, they are trying to move. So the first challenge is to go to the Ukrainian borders and then cross over to the neighboring countries for safety. Number one challenge. Number two, what kind of pathway? Is it rail route? Is it roads? Is it any other vehicles which can take them? Or is it trucking? So from the eyes of our Indian students' experience, it looks like there are no organized transportation. Many times students are made to walk several hours and literally go to the borders, and they may reach or may not reach on time. What happens to the cross-firing in between? What happens to them in terms of the struggle for stay, for safety, for food? These are all, I think, a tremendous experience, tremendous unfortunate situation that they are undergoing, which need to be taken into cognizance. But I think Indian government has been proactive in terms of going to the neighboring countries, mobilizing and receiving. Anyway, now coming back to the Ukrainians' own crisis, Ukrainians' own way of how they are displaced. Interestingly, there are a lot of railroad companies in several of these places like Poland, Germany. They allow the Ukrainian refugees to travel by train free of charge. This is something very interesting to take note of. The fact that even the inter-country movement that they have said that they can travel very freely brings in a kind of a contrast what we had seen during our own COVID crisis, the reverse reverse migrant movement which happened. And it's very disheartening to remember that we did not arrange adequate reverse transportation during the COVID crisis within our Indian experience. I'm recalling. Now, if these migrant laborers have suffered due to lack of social welfare, lack of medical, lack of health, safety, that they were fearing and fleeing, and even for that at that time, the government of India had to impose a kind of a train fare for them, is very disheartening experience. Already these people have lost their jobs at that time, and then they were trying to do the reverse migration to the native places just for the safety. Nothing was organized, nothing was coordinated. Now, in a contrast, you have here a very unfortunate humanitarian crisis unfolding, but very interestingly, these countries are coordinating with each other, even for an inter-country movement from Ukraine to Poland or Ukraine to Germany. You have them traveling. The train fares are not there, and they're allowed to travel freely. Number one. Number two, from a humanitarian perspective, it is very good to see none of them are asking for their passport or a visa or any kind of a travel document or any kind of, asylum seeking papers. That's something very interesting again in this kind of a thing. For example, on 3rd March, from one of the news items, the European Union ministers have agreed to invoke the Temporary Protection Directive for the first time in the history of Europe in the post-Second World War, that the refugees from Ukraine marching into European Union do not have to go through the standard European Union asylum procedure. This is something quite interesting, quite important to take note of, how the humanitarian arms are open to receive these people who are into deep stress and deep pain and agony that they are fleeing, and they're told not to go through any kind of paperwork, which might have taken a few days in the borders and could have got harassed further, but they are all giving them an open arm policy where they can come and march into any country, and then there are receptions being set up. It's good to see in the television media where they're allowed to go, where there are people offering them coffee, biscuits to children, and breads given, and all that support is an overwhelming thing. In this hard crisis, it is good to see a good humanitarian gesture by these from these countries. Even some people argue that it is probably within Europe that they are doing it, but why they did not do a similar thing to Serbian victims or Bosnian victims in the former Yugoslavian conflict earlier, or some of the African conflicts which go on, or even for that matter, the very recent post-Arab Spring Syrian conflict, when many have marched in. Why did they put the humanitarian barriers? Why did they close the refugee camps, as France had done it at some point of time? There are many who were made to suffer in the Mediterranean Sea. Is also a contrasting question. The humanitarian agencies or humanitarian perspective one may want to juxtapose, but we can forget all that and say that at least at this juncture, the Ukrainians are able to be received by these countries, and you're almost actually setting a new good practice, I would call it, or a new benchmark on how, if your neighborhood suffers, how you are supposed to open the doors. Here I'm pausing here and contrasting to the situation what happened in 1971 in then East Pakistan, which later on became Bangladesh. Obviously, during that 1971 crisis, when nearly not just a few thousands or lakhs, but 10 million people, 1 crore people, when they came into India, fearing for their lives at the time because of the East-West Pakistan crisis at the time. As we all know, the West Pakistan tried to use force against the people in East Pakistan to suppress their voices at the time. I think it's very important that India not only received the refugees, took care of them, but I think we have done our humanitarian gesture of, repatriating them very safely by even helping them to get liberated from the clutches of West Pakistan, which committed allegedly at the time the genocide or kind of huge war crimes, suppressing the people. I think that is very well is on record that India played the twin role of receiving the refugees, taking care of them and repatriating them and helping them to get liberated. And today you have a proud, independent, a sovereign nation state called Bangladesh. So therefore India had played that role, and I think that is something a very poignant thing at that time. We are just trying to juxtapose the role being played. But mind you, at that time, let us take into cognizance that India in the early 70s did not have adequate financial support, did not have adequate infrastructure, did not have adequate resources. In spite of all that, it has taken care of these 10 million people. And it is also said that at the time, UN did not come forward to help India. Rather, India, did everything on its own without any kind of help from any big powers or even from UN system at that time. And we also know that how the geopolitics and the shadows of the Cold War was very much experienced in Indian waters. The Indian Ocean experienced the movement of United States and European, warships in our waters, and how that got in a way countered with the help emerging from the Soviet Union at the time to counter these big powers to come in and coerce India. Anyway, this is again history. This is where we use the term that it is a time-tested relationship we have with Russia, and Russia had many times vetoed in the UN Security Council any negative resolutions against India. If this be so, India has an obligation to reciprocate. And that is, I think, something as a context we need to also have. That does not mean India does not voice the support for Ukrainians, does not say that it will help do the humanitarian help, does not mince the words that it will mediate even between Russia and Ukraine and try to mitigate the conflict. I think that is something important, that we need to go in the direction. How do we de-escalate the conflict? How do we take care of the humanitarian needs and concerns? How do we address them? How do we do the management of things? So you have, within the, international law, there are several important laws which are available. I'm just placing some of them, right from Universal Declaration of Human Rights, right to seek asylum and non-deprivation of nationality, to the Convention on the Status of Refugees, 1951 and 67 Protocol, Convention on Statelessness, 54, and Reduction, 61, ICCPR, that is International Covenant on Civil Political Rights, International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, Sustainable Development Goal frameworks, which works on disaster risk reduction and other things on one side, also on the humanitarian needs, leave no one behind and promote peaceful and inclusive societies. It's also a context I'm just trying to flag. Besides that, you have the 4 Geneva Conventions, and importantly 2 protocols among the 3 protocols, which are very important. I think that is something which we need to revisit. I think these conventions are fairly clearly talked about the protection of civilians, protection of people who are considered prisoners of war, whatsoever it may be. I think a situation will come where either Russia may take over few Ukrainians as prisoners of war, the Ukrainians may take few Russians as prisoners of war. And we all know that as per the international law and the humanitarian laws, international humanitarian law, that you need to respect the right of the individual, even if they are, captured, that you need to respect. So therefore, these are some of the norms which are already available. I think the Geneva Conventions and Hague Conventions are very important from that perspective. I will not go into refugee much. We have said that already the gestures which are extended by the neighbors are great, and they need to support in a very big way. I'll just conclude with this, that I think the need now is humanitarian diplomacy, be it UN, be it the big powers. I think they need to promote the talks which are already going on in Belarus between Russia and Ukraine. It should be more supported. And I think, as Professor Menon had mentioned earlier, that at least they've agreed to do the humanitarian pause or humanitarian corridor opening, which is very important. I think they should pause the conflict, pause the war, to ensure that people who have to be evacuated have to be evacuated. There has to be better coordination for refugees as well as internal displacement. And the evacuations have to be coordinated much better, which is already going on well, but I think they need to do it well because of the fact that still few more thousand Indian students are stranded. And the message coming from Mr. Putin that some of them are taken hostages, some of them are kept under the as a prisoners by the Ukraine. We do not know the facts on the ground, nor India's verified it so far. But I think it's a matter of concern that no student can be harmed, be it Russian forces or Ukrainian forces. I think they should facilitate their safe return. They should return on one side. And the Ukrainians, be it women, children, elderly, they, I think, have to be taken care, and they should be also provided proper assistance. Perhaps I think UN has to increase its role in terms of how they will do the conflict mitigation, how will they do the conflict resolution. Here, the role of UN OCHA is very important. We have a framework already available called the R2P, the responsibility to protect. Where it has gone, I think they should have done their early warnings properly and ensured that there would have been adequate interventions and mediations, which seem to have not worked. But I think probably an element of surprise coming from Putin, which is unfortunate, but I think there should have been a proper diplomatic mediation. French head of state, German chancellor, I think they all have made their attempt, but I think it should have been much more carefully calibrated and done. So the role of UN Human Rights Council, role of UN, High Commissioner for Refugees, and bodies like ICRC, International Committee of Red Cross, Red Crescent. I think they all have a very big role. So I see that the humanitarian agencies have to coordinate, cooperate, ensuring that they could take care of the alleviation of the suffering of the people who are affected. It is, I think, very, very important at this juncture. So these are my, preliminary observations on what is going on in Ukraine and what kind of humanitarian outpouring it will have. I think if the war escalates, there is going to be a very long, drawn challenges to this displaced population, where I think UN and other humanitarian agencies have to come together and play that role. Is a long haul. It's going to be. We do not know how long. We hope that this conflict will be resolved. Our own wishful thinking that it will be resolved and peace will be restored in this region. With this, I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your brief explanation and wonderful session. And it was very useful, and I think many would have gathered the information, a clear picture of what's happening in Ukraine. So we just received a message from Dr. Nandakishore that's saying that his phone has completely gone out of control and he's not having any internet service at home, so he's unable to join. So he has asked, sorry for the inconvenience. So I think like we can continue with a QA session or anything else with a Suresh sir, anything else has to be, or
I'm seeing a hand being raised. Do you want to also check up if somebody wants to ask any questions? I see one Mr.
Yes.
Hubert has raised his hand.
Yes.
Yes, sir. That's what QA session. I was like, we can just continue with the QA session. So I just want to continue with the QA session since sir is not available. So anyone who is in the meeting is having any question can raise your questions to Mr. The resource person.
Hello. I was the one who raised the hand.
Yes, please.
Yes. It was a very wonderful talk, Mr. Dr. Parivedan sir. And to all the people, I am student of Parivedan and Suresh Kumar. They are my gurus. Well, it's wonderful. You are the one who made me. You are the one who made me to me what I am. So now coming to the point, COVID and climate disaster is killing the world. Now, do we need this war at all? Is my start of the topic. Ukraine is a sovereign state. As you rightly said, looking beyond the past, it is done this, it is done that, doesn't hold good. You see America also, what they have done to the Native American, the Red Indian, is also the same level. Now, sir, Donbass issue taken as an excuse to attack Ukraine is not good. Well, regarding neutrality, I have a different view. I won't talk about it now. Sir, Russians themselves are so sad and repentant of the Putin's action. Most of the Russians have come out in support of Ukraine. And also there is a team called Chelsea has agreed to pay millions of dollars to the Ukraine for the disaster cost. So what I feel is Putin is filled with aggression and wickedness. There is no use of talking to him at all. Nothing will work. He'll only show different sides of himself. He should be treated as a war criminal. This is what is my view. Now coming to the point of rescuing Indians, yes, most of the people are doing the best. Like for example, I've seen Romanians. They are doing the best what they can. Even from Romanian, Chennai consulate is also helping is trying to help the best what they could. So what I see a very sad thing is, there is a disparity when these children or students are rescued, seeing whether they are north or whether they are south. That is not good at all. A student, an Indian student is an Indian student, is a child, whoever it may be. That cannot be tolerated. And what I see, we see only on the face value, sir. See, the bigger villain is China, if I could take. He is he is making Putin as a puppet. You see, China's invasion is nothing for them. Take, for example, Tibet. So if this continues, tomorrow it would be Taiwan. Later, it could be Singapore, any other nation which is smaller and successful. That's all I have to place your views, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it was more of a comment rather than a question. Thanks to Mr. Hubert. We know that you yourself are a very important humanitarian. You play a very important role in your own ways, which we all know. You're doing a good work, especially in and around Chennai. You have made a very good observation. I agree with you that when you already have COVID and climate issues and other challenges, do we need a war, and do we need at all? To put it in a lighter vein, somebody even circulated a message in the social media that the fact that Putin had started the war, and in a way he has ended the COVID. Nobody is now talking about COVID. That's how in a lighter vein people have argued. But anyway, in this serious matter, it's not to be taken that very lightly. This is not the way to say so. But I agree with you, the point that, Putin could have been more cautious, could have dialogued more, could have given some time. But as I narrated, that there are always narratives to the war. What we by and large have seen is a kind of US Western thing that Putin is all wrong to send his troops and invade or intervene. But I just tried to flag or highlight some of the history and past and the regional, geopolitics, which is also very important to understand from the very Eurasian point of view, how the dynamics, that equilibrium, which ought to have been there, and if Ukraine is trying to alter that equilibrium by moving towards NATO, therefore then the problems are unfolding. But for me, I have one question also to ask to myself as well as to the audience. Do we need at all a body called NATO before the war? And that seems to be one of the reasons when NATO wanted to expand eastward. And that is the reason why Russia has got irritated and wanted to, preemptively not allow Ukraine to take that kind of a thing. Anyway, all the branding and blaming, all that have been going on. So that is something also, which we need to understand. But I agree to you at the end of the day that there shall not be any discriminations. But it's seemingly reported overall that students are discriminated in Ukraine when they're crossing. They're not allowed that easily to move out. I do not know about the north-south happening anything of that sort, but I'm sure every state is endeavoring. We have heard about Tamil Nadu arranging a delegation of member of parliament and some members from the state assembly to go and coordinate from the neighborhood. Similarly, I'm hearing from Maharashtra trying to send some delegates to some of the neighborhood and to the Ukrainian neighborhood and see how they could all be evacuated and brought back safely. I think that is something already going on, and therefore, in a way, the point to take notice that war is not good, war is not fair. And war of this scale, when there can be nuclear flashpoints, including the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov commenting that if at all there is going to be a third world war, the third world war will be a nuclear war. I think these are all giving a big alarming thing. It's not just a regional war in that sense. Imagine that it has got all the scope that it can get escalated. European countries can get involved and America can get involved directly, and then it can escalate into a global nuclear holocaust, in fact. And that gives us a kind of a thing that it's not correct, it's not good what is going on. They should therefore mitigate, that therefore should bring conflict resolution. I think UN has to come in a very big way to do so. So the question I raised is that, do you need a NATO when there is no Warsaw Pact anymore? Why do you need a NATO to continue and trying to go into creating this imbalance? That question, I do not know what will be the answer or how that could be done, but just I'm raising it,
I agree, sir. I agree with you totally. Sir, the point is like whether we need NATO or not, it's a point of discussion. But that is for the Ukraine to decide whether they need or not need NATO. And now using that as, see, you should not find an excuse to attack a person. That is very, very sad and shameful. Now, sir, the point is China's role, behind its villainous role, behind all this scene. How do you see it, sir?
No, as of now, As of now, I do not see anything directly China has any role in the conflict ongoing, excepting the fact that they're trying to provide the traditional support to Russia, that is very evident that the China is trying to not take sides, not there to openly comment or question Russian intervention. And they are trying to probably see that in this conflict that they could also indirectly benefit, if not directly, that when you have these big powers going into confrontation, and that can perhaps pave the way for what you call the quote unquote emerging China, that they will have better scope militarily, better scope otherwise to do that. But also I see from the news reports that Chinese are also trying to talk about mediation, trying to talk about the talks between Russia and Ukraine, and ensuring that they should bilaterally resolve this issue is also a positive sign. Otherwise, I don't see Chinese doing anything in a big way into this conflict. For me, at least that's how I see. Thanks, Mr. Hubert. I think there are some comments which have come in the chat box.
Yes, sir. So can I?
Please, yes.
Yes, so actually I'm professor from Auxilium College. Some of my students are actually listening to the session. One student is having a question to ask. Can I
Sure.
give the...
Sure, please.
You can ask the student to unmute and then raise the question.
Actually, we are in the classroom.
Okay.
So she will come in person.
Sure, please.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please.
Yes, please go ahead.
Louder, please. There is a query from Kadapa, from academician.
Professor Maria Selvam, one of the students is asking a question.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Please.
Yes, please go ahead. Kindly use the mic so that we can listen to you. Yes, please. Yes. Yeah, please use the mic. Yeah.
Unmute the microphone.
Yeah, so what's going on Russia and Ukraine, sir? Reason for the war?
Sir, is it audible, sir? She's having a question that they are not aware that what is the reason Russia has taken a war against Ukraine. So what is the reason? What is the purpose of the war?
Right.
Many are not aware on that.
Right. I think I had briefly presented, earlier in the beginning. I was just trying to tell you the relationship between Ukraine and Russia as bordering countries. They have been part of the former Soviet Union. They got disintegrated in 1991. There were also kind of power equations and other things which are going on. And mind you here, one thing to take note of that Russian Federation has its own ambitions at some point in the global level, but now at least they want to maintain that power in the regional level. Therefore, they don't want to allow any NATO expansion into the neighborhood, right? That is one important thing. Second aspect is that within Ukraine, some part of Eastern Ukraine has sizable Russian-speaking population, which lives there. They're part of Ukraine, but they're Russian-speaking. Now, these Russian-speaking have alleged that they're not treated well by Ukraine. And therefore, they have sought the help of Russia. As you had seen in 2014, a little earlier, in fact, that there was another territory called Crimea, which had also a large Russian base. It was a kind of a Black Sea, fleet base for Russia, where the Russians have given the land, to Ukraine at that time during the Soviet Union time, but then forcefully they have taken it back. When Ukraine was not ready to give it or anything, then they used force and did. So even now in this region, Eastern Ukraine, they had gone, is in the name of humanitarian intervention. That these people are not treated well, they are coming as refugees into Russia. Therefore, Russia argued at one level that they are doing. But there are others who argue that this is a disguise, that they are trying to use this as a kind of a vague reason to intervene in Ukraine, because very much they want to go into Ukraine is one reason they're arguing. Then there is also something called pipeline politics. Since they're asking what is the reason, let us also touch on that. The pipeline politics is that the Russian Federation wants to supply the oil and gas to the European region, and that was passing through Ukraine. Now, Ukraine was straight away getting few $1 million as a kind of transit route that they were availing. But at some point of time, the Russian Federation, I believe, also realized that a lot of pilferage is happening in their pipelines, which they have no control. In order to avoid the pilferage, the leakage, then they said that they will set up a kind of sea route. That's called the Nord Stream between Germany and Russia. Now, that very Nord Stream had brought some kind of a dissatisfaction to Ukraine, because Ukraine was otherwise getting some kind of a transit money earlier. Now that is not, they are not going to get it. So therefore, that they have also, kept up certain pressure on Russia and trying to kind of side with Europe and all that is one backdrop. The territory, Donbas region, ethnic population is the second reason. The third is perhaps that Russia wants to tell Ukraine and to the world community, and particularly the NATO and NATO members, that they should not canvas to allow their neighboring countries to become part of the NATO, where some have already gone, some of our former Soviet Union republics, they have gone already. So I think that is a tussle that the NATO wanting to expand. NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is essentially a military pact, which can go into create the disturbance in the balance of power or equilibrium, as we are mentioning. Now, the Russians, to put it in a simple words, the Russian Federation does not want Ukraine to be used as a NATO base where they can bring any weapons, any nuclear arsenal. They don't want that to happen. So preemptively, they're thinking that they have to teach a lesson to Ukraine and tell them that they have to be listening to the Russian voices. So these are some of the backdrop why they are doing so. But if you look at from the UN Charter, where a sovereign country is a sovereign country, no way big power can go and coerce, big power can go and control them. Is also to be taken into account that you cannot violate the UN, that is United Nations Charter, principle of peace and coexistence. You cannot violate it. You can't go into another country. So that is what is seemingly, going on, which is very, very unfortunate. There should have been dialogue process. There should have been talks. That would have been much, much better. So we all are, as a humanitarian people, human rights people, rule of law rule of law abiding people, we feel that this is setting a bad trend. Now you are a very powerful country, you can enter another country and intervene, is I think not a very fair one, not a correct thing, and therefore what Ukrainians are rebelling or fighting or resisting is, I think, a very painful one, but yet we need to salute the Ukrainian resilience, definitely, that they are trying to withstand the very big power, which is Russia. So it's an importantly final point that Russian geopolitical game that they want to do and assert themselves in the region, that in Eurasia, that they are the most powerful, and anybody wants to take any decision, they have to be consulted. I think that's a very message that Russia wants to do, which is seemingly not very correct, not very fair. Yeah. Yes, next question, please.
Yeah, sir. Thank you, sir. I already heard about it, but I want a more detail about NATO and others, sir. So I asked you a question.
You want to know more about NATO?
No, sir. It's now clear, sir.
Was actually aware of the war, it seems, sir. She had a confusion between what is NATO and what is the difference between the reason why these people are actually fighting. So she had a confusion, and your experience made her let me clear.
Yeah.
Thank
Yes.
you, thanks.
Okay. Any other question? If you think you are satisfied with NATO. So NATO, as we said earlier, just I'm recapping only in one line, that North Atlantic Treaty Organization is a security pact created during the peak of Cold War in order to counterbalance Warsaw Pact. So at the time, Soviet Union and other East European countries were part of the Warsaw Pact, and Western Europe and United States, they were all part of the NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So I also raised a question that when you have the Cold War ended, when Warsaw Pact is dissolved, why do you keep a NATO as a body? And then even in a recent conversation, one more question also came up, that if you have UN as a body, United Nations as a body to mediate and promote peace and security worldwide, why do you need to create a NATO as a body? Right? So that is also kind of an ethical question to raise, that why do you want to keep NATO and keep mooting a tension between Russia and its neighbors? That is also an important question we need to ask. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions?
Hello, this is Suresh here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Two questions from Hyderabad. Actually, they are watching the YouTube because the connectivity could not be established. So the questions are: one is, will this war will have an impact on the global economy? Number two, what will be the status of the Indian students if this continues?
Sorry, your voice is very feeble. First question is, what will be the impact on the global economy, right?
Yeah.
Number one. Number two?
Number two is, what will be the status of the Indian students who are pursuing their education in Ukraine if this kind of situation continues?
Okay. Got it. See, number one, on the economy front, yes, already, the global economy is in shambles. The COVID had attributed to the challenges in the global economy. Now, I'm sure this Ukrainian crisis is already sending messages that there is going to be oil crisis. There is going to be enormous pressure, and the prices can, escalate. It can lead to more inflation. And within Europe, again, it can have a tremendous impact on the economy because many are interlinked with Russia in a way for oil, gas, and import, export, all that are there. The fact that a conflict can go on for some time can bring a tremendous impact, not just in the region, not just in Eurasia or Europe, but I think for the entire global economy, it can have a tremendous negative impact. I think we all are trying to just bounce back or trying to recover from the COVID crisis. Now, this Ukrainian crisis is definitely going to have a huge impact on the economy. It's going to bring more inflation, more shortages of natural resource materials like oil, gas, and all that. And I think even countries like Germany, France, and others in Europe, UK, I think they all are going to suffer invariably because of this conflict, number one. So global economy is going to be impacted. United States can get impacted. India can very badly be impacted. That's one. Number two is about, what is the future of these students? There are two things which this question unfolds. Number one, why in the first place are Indian students in such large numbers are going to Russia or Ukraine to do medicine or any other technical course? Because India is today an hub for education. When we are able to invite so many foreign students into our country, why are they going? So that I think need to be answered in a larger sense, that what kind of medical education system we have, whether NEET has come in a big way and that's being debated, whether there could be adequate avenues. I think we need to rethink on that front. How do we cater to the aspiring students who want to pursue medicine, and how that I think is an important question to reflect. Number two, what happens to the current status itself? I think we need to look at from the lens that these students may not be able to go back to Ukraine, looking at the situation, whatever is unfolding. I think Indian system, Indian government, I think needs to have a kind of, a rehabilitation, resettlement approach where the students are, not discontinued because of the very conflict, which is nothing to do with them. But the fact that they have spent money, gone, suffered, and they're going to return now, I think we need to have an approach in which they could all be admitted in our ongoing. It's a kind of wishful way I'm saying. I do not know the implications and what are the capacities we have. But wishfully I'm placing in solidarity with the students that they should all be accommodated in the Indian universities and they should be made to continue their education. That's what I simply think, should be the solidarity which we should do for these returning students. They should nowhere be, made to discontinue. They should nowhere be affected. Even I'm seeing a point that yes, their educational loans, the money they've spent, even for them to study further, there should be some kind of fee waiver and other things which should help them to manage the loss they could have incurred and all that. I think that's very important for us to really reflect on that and accommodate them in pursuit of their education. I think that's the least we can do as a part of relief rehabilitation, I feel, for the returning students. But we need to reflect what are the larger things which are going to happen at the country level. Let us see. But I see them as a kind of humanitarian victims themselves. And therefore, dealing this subject, I feel that we need to study them more. I see one indication that already, I think whether ICMR, Indian Council of Medical Research, or somebody has been made to map the students and look at their background, which level they are studying and all that. Probably that I see it as a positive indication. They perhaps want to map them and then induct them or rehabilitate them into our medical colleges and universities. Perhaps we do not know. There is a policy announcement have to be made by Government of India in coordination with the state governments, state medical institutions. Let us see that front. Yes.
Thank you, Pari. Thank you. That one more last question is there. Since US is involved, USA is involved one side with the European countries and Russia on the other side, will there be a possibility it may lead to world war, third world war? That's a question from Hyderabad.
I think that's a very important question, that if United States is getting into this entanglement directly, what we use the term quote unquote boots on the ground, if United States have to do it, definitely it will be a direct confrontation between two big parts, United States and Russia, for the fact that they hold around 80% of the nuclear arsenal of the world. And we know the repercussions, both of them having multiple capacities to destroy the world in many times. That's what the assessments go. Anyway, now both of them are heavily nuclear armed countries. God forbid, they should never confront each other. Already the indications coming from President Joe Biden is that United States will not directly get into the war. What they have done is that they have sent their soldiers, I think numbering around 2,000 or 3,000, where United States has sent the soldiers to go and provide training, capacity building, and support the Ukrainians. That's the word it has been used. But I would call it rather, United States should take a position rather than supporting only Ukrainian, rather they should go as peace mediators. United States should go as a peace mediators, try to support both, or all I would call is that it should be something like a, international peacekeeping mission rather than going and escalating the war. I think that is the role United States should do. If United States is able to take care of that, it is better that it will not turn into a third world war. I think the questioner has rightly anticipated if US gets into direct confrontation, it can definitely lead to a third world war. And the words of Russian foreign minister Lukrov, that it can turn into a nuclear holocaust, which we do not want to see. I think European nations are also trying to show their maturity, not to escalate the war, but I think they are going in a different path, that they want to impose economic sanctions and put a pressure on Russia, but not to militarily intervene. If each one of them militarily intervene, definitely it's going to be a very, very dangerous global war. We hope that that does not happen, but rather they should do peace mediation and they should rather try to resolve this very conflict. Already I've also seen some important messages in the chat box. Professor Menon himself had important points is raised. I just glanced at it. I thought I'll finish the round of participant messages, questions, and then come back here. where there's an important point about the cluster munitions and other use of cluster munition against residential settlements of civilians, killing and maiming civilians, attack on hospitals, schools, and even kindergarten and nuclear power plants needs more discussion. I agree with you, Professor, that they have to be very careful about it. Number one, as per the already Geneva Conventions and Hague Convention, there are certain restrictions already which have to be followed. One, the protection of civilians are paramount. I think already they are compromising on both the sides. Number two, the use of these kind of weapons, whether these kind of armaments, be it munition, cluster munitions, or carpet bombing, or even the alleged chlorine bombs which were used in Syria, I think are all important contexts that these are all banned weapons. I think as per the UN, as per the Geneva Conventions and Hague Conventions, prevention of chemical weapons, biological weapons, prevention of these kind of cluster munitions are, I think, very important. And I think protecting civilians goes without saying that, as civilized nations, that we don't do so. I'm sure Russians are also projecting the restraint on one side, that they are not doing all out bombing and entering, but they're also selectively doing their military targets and entering. That's what they say. But the question here is about the collateral damage. Whatever they target, whatever they do, how much ever precisions they may have. I think there are a lot of civilian buildings being attacked. Last 1 week, we have been watching the visuals of civilian buildings being attacked, and hospitals sometimes are being targeted and all that. I think is a matter of concern on both the sides, be it Russia or Ukraine or any other neutral body which may enter. I think protecting civilians, I think, is paramount, which we have in Geneva Convention 3 very clearly specified. We have the common article 2 and 3 again, which emphasizes again and again that civilians at any cost should not be harmed in any warfare. I think that needs to be reinforced. But besides that, if they're affected, how well they can be taken care, how well they'll be protected within Ukraine or outside the Ukraine is, I think, where we need to upscale the humanitarian support. I'm sure the Red Cross, Red Crescent kind of bodies need to be enhanced, supported by other humanitarian players. Thereby, they will be able to coordinate that well. There are also, I think, other comments which have come in as knowledge is uneven among individuals, nature resources are also uneven amongst countries. Hence arise the human egos of power and supremacy. Okay, more of a comment. Yes, is all the egos that, which need to be minimized and prevent conflicts. Or Russian action for personal safety. Yes, I think they have their national interest, which they don't want to compromise. They're coming in. But that cannot be justified. How much ever we are trying to look at the other perspective, besides what is already available in the media, we are looking at the Russian own rationale, but we are not justifying it that, that they can do such an action. Will education be waived off? As I said earlier, let us see. We hope that the government of India is more sensitive in trying to rehabilitate these students. Let us see. We have 2 or 3 years of medical education for giving normal medical care. The larger remote living population, yes. Sir, how the prisoner of war dealt by Russia and Ukraine in the current crisis are the following Geneva Conventions? I think they are supposed to follow the Geneva Conventions. Definitely, after the Vietnam War, in a very big way, we have enhanced the prisoner of war, convention in a very big way. Convention 3 deals with prisoner of war. I make a correction. Convention 4 deals with the protection of civilians. So Convention 3 is about prisoners of war. I think they need to protect, people who are hors combat, as we call those who even were surrendered weapons, who have even injured soldiers, need to be treated as civilians and they need to be protected. Let us hope that they follow the Geneva Conventions. Let us see how that works. At the optimistic way, when Putin be taken in as a war criminal, oil prices can come down. I think Mr. Hubert has made that point, more like a comment. All right, I think from my side, I have read few comments which I could see. If there are anything else missed out, if anybody else wants to say, I'm ready to also take up. I would also want to listen to Professor Vinod Chandra Menon if he wishes to come in and speak a few words. I'm sure with his larger expertise, as a humanitarian professional, as a disaster management expert. I'm sure he had been to USSR. In our conversations, he has mentioned that he has gone for certain specialized trainings in former USSR. I'm sure his perspectives. I would also want to listen to him briefly. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parivalan. Actually, I think in a conflict situation, there are certain considerations of governments which would actually influence decision making, especially on global platforms like the International Atomic Energy Agency, where decision against attacks on nuclear power plants are being discussed. If a country abstains, then that is not neutrality. That is actually something which we would need to see as taking a position which either has to be clarified in terms of to the global forums as to why we are actually taking that kind of a stand. Similarly, with the Security Council and also with the HRC, actually, when we have this kind of platforms, abstaining is not neutrality. Abstaining is also taking a position which would indirectly get implied that we are actually also aligning with the aggressor. And I think the use of the word intervention and not invasion would also not be appropriate, because the way in which columns of armed forces and also air forces attacking civilian settlements and also attacking cities from Belarus and also from Crimea and from various borders, trying to corner a country of 44 million people is actually something which we need to see. They already are scarred with the trauma of the Holocaust, which they have actually gone through. And, so in terms of the psyche of the people, I think they also have something which we will need to see as humanity. Looking at, war reparations itself would be very, very colossal. The way in which, attacks have been happening in different locations in different cities, whether it is Kyiv, or whether it is Kharkiv, or whether it is Sumy, or even Kherson, we see that most of these cities, even Odisha, actually, closer to Moldova, we find that all these cities have actually, been taken into control or taken under the control of the invading forces. So, which means basically that there is an attempt to basically put the pressure on Ukraine and also to paralyze their power supply, because the nuclear power is actually the source of power to a very large extent in Ukraine. And so attacking their power installations would actually also cripple the society in many ways, because if you don't have access to power, then lifts will not work, banks will not work, ATMs will not work, and then you will not have access to mobiles, phones, and communication, and also the internet. So in effect, you are paralyzing the media, you're paralyzing the entire society. So these are all issues from the humanitarian concern. We would need to really see the need for de-escalation without actually, the provocations coming in from either blocks, because you have many blocks in the picture right now, whether it is in terms of sanctions, whether it is in terms of supply of armaments to Ukraine. These are all, or funding coming into Ukraine. These are all ways by which things are happening. But I think when somebody sends armaments, or somebody sends funding, or somebody sends relief, humanitarian relief, then that is also taking a certain stand that you are actually supporting the community which is affected, and we stand with the community. So many people have been saying in social media that we stand with Ukraine. And I think humanity cannot afford to go through a nuclear kind of aggression. So any aggrandizement to that extent would actually be a mutual assured destruction. because you have nuclear missiles pointing towards cities, both in Russia as well as in the US. So if, the superpowers, whether they actually come, it is actually in many ways going back into the Cold War, becoming highly precipitated. So I think, we are also seeing the need for the UN taking a strong stand, Security Council taking a strong stand. And then, because whatever is happening in the Middle East, or whatever is happening in Jordan, or in Syria, or in Yemen, international organizations have a role to basically take a stand and then influence public opinion and influence national leaderships and intergovernmental platforms. Intergovernmental platforms like SAARC and ASEAN and many others, whether it is in the Caribbean, Latin America and the Caribbean, or whether it is in Africa, or whether it is in Europe, they all need to take stands. So we have NATO on one side, we have the EU on the other side, and there are overlaps. And then you have the US, and then you have China and Russia. So between this, it's not a bipolar world anymore. It is actually becoming, very complex. And China is also becoming a player in this whole exercise. And China abstaining also has implications. I think, diplomacy is something, as you very rightly said, the geopolitics is actually changing the world. And we need to be very conscious of that. And, we should not have a situation when our students become, victims in the crossfire. We need to have humanitarian stands which are actually, much more, some kind of a very positive kind of affirmative action. And affirmative action, I think, is what is needed. And I hope that, in your discussions within the UN agencies and all the other organizations and institutions and things like that, we need to really plea for affirmative action. And that is, I think, one of the largest humanitarian concerns in the interest of, the people who are already devastated by COVID, people who have been grieving of people who have lost their lives, people who have lost their employment, jobs and income. And we cannot afford to have another price escalation for petrol and diesel, and which will also have implications for transport of goods and services and things, so that there's going to be spiraling inflation. And, so we need to also address this in a mature manner as governments. And, India can definitely play that role, as a government which actually can influence global opinion. And we should actually be having that kind of a stand in global forums. That's what I personally feel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think you have given a very balanced stand on how world community should respond and how in India, but in particular, should intervene and play a positive role rather than either abstaining or otherwise. Also, I think you have also highlighted that point. Point well taken. From my side, I'm handing over to the organizing team to.
Yeah, just one more point about the use of social media. And I think without really understanding the implications of many of these things, people actually send messages and then they start getting escalated and then, duplicated, and then, the truth becomes a casualty.
Exactly.
That's
the point we have been discussing about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I think, we need to be very clear on that when the government of India actually, communicate something, then, it has to be something where, we should not be, we should understand the shades of gray, and we should actually be very clear that human lives are involved. We should actually be extremely sensitive to that. Thank you.
Definitely. I think being sensitive is very important. And I think Russia is trying to impose a lot of laws to restrict, I think, freedom of press or freedom. That's again, I think, contrastingly, that they're trying to control everything is also wrong. There has to be freedom. The fact that some of the Russians themselves have risked their lives and come to the streets and protested against the war waged by Russia is, I think, is a sign of their resilience, the sign of the humanity that they've expressed. I think that's also very important, that we should keep it free, but it should be more authentic information, and there should not be any false things circulated. That is, I think, very important takeaway. Thank you, sir.
And several Nobel laureates, also putting their signatures on, an appeal for ending war and aggression, I think is also very symbolic, So we need to also see how global opinion in terms of, both global leaders, whether it is people like Ban Ki-moon or, Helen Clark or Akim Sena or, people, who would actually be taking that stand. We've lost people like Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela and, the people who could actually take those kind of stands on global platforms. But we still, I think, would need to really use every opportunity to create that public opinion which can move towards that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, both the experts, our session chair, as well as our today's expert, Dr. Parivalan sir, who presented your own assignment, as well as you have answered almost all the questions raised by our participant in YouTube, Zoom, and direct question raised, that too from the classroom. We are fortunate to have listened the participants raising question from the classroom. Thanks for the Dr. Priyadashini for arranging that. And many Red Cross volunteers are here. For your information, more than 8,000 affected community is being protected by Red Cross movements, those who are in bunkers and metros, undergrounds. First aid training also given, and people are transported to hospitals, and other humanitarian activities are being carried out in Ukraine, and Singapore Red Cross and many other international Red Cross movements working in the field, and that is an information to be shared. Now let us hear from Professor Priyadashini. Any concluding message you have?
Thank you. Thanks a lot for, yes, sir. Good evening. Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Yes, sir. So thank you, sir. Sir, thank you. Thanks for giving a very clear explanation. And it was a wonderful session. Actually had a very big doubt why Russia is having war against Ukraine, and they were very much confused about what is happening there. And they also had some queries like,
hope we can conclude the session by extending water thanks. Yeah. The Disaster Resilient India 2030. For the last 2 years, organized different webinars. This is one of the most important, and it is in the critical moments we organize this webinar. It is a pity occasion that Dr. Parivalan sir, Associate Professor from Tata Institute of Social Work, joined, given lot of inputs on humanitarian inputs, how to handle the affected community, how to handle the refugees, how to handle the community at large, especially the old, sick, and wounded. So he has great concern on refugees, and he has been working not only in the classroom but also in the field, right from tsunami and cyclone and Sri Lankan war. He witnessed a lot of situations. That's why he could answer all the queries raised by our participants, and you could give what is NATO, what for this war is there, and regarding NATO coming to NATO for the information of students. The NATO countries, if one country is affected, it is equal that all other nations feel that they are affected and all the NATO countries may react. So that is why the NATO is highly powerful, and I hope carefully moving. Whole international community is moving very carefully, that somehow we have to stop war, and not only Ukrainians, all the nations across the world should be protected. That is the one and only agenda. Hope the two nations will sit and come to a conclusion with the expert opinion of UN and all other international communities for the welfare of human suffering. We pray that this war should calm down in a very short period, and the topmost priority should be given that there are messages coming that they don't have water, no medicine, no shelter. Basic communities are being stopped. There were blasts in the school buildings, hospitals, and even their own day-to-day livelihood is questioned. So at least we have to stop war for 1 or 2 days and sit and plan and come to a conclusion with the support of all the international organization. Let the peace be prevailed in whole world, especially in Ukraine and Russia. And we have more concern on the migrants, especially the student community who are there in Ukraine and Russia for their higher studies. Peacefully, they should return back to their homeland, and they should enjoy the freedom. And the member nations should plan for a new protocol, or higher education plan has to be protected. Like our Parivalan sir and Professor Menon sir suggested, that no way the education should not get affected, and their country education system has to be taken care of by the, of course, the government of India and the different state and neighboring countries. Everybody is having one and only agenda, that peace should prevail, and we hope this session will bring new knowledge sharing session among we are borderless. There is no nation. We are working like a one nation. The blood is one and the same for Russians and Ukrainians. So we are brethren. We have to work together for the peace of the nations. On behalf of the participants, organizers, I take the privilege of thanking our session chair, Professor Vinod Chandran Menon sir, for initiating, chairing this session and giving your inputs. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And next, our session chair today, author of the program, Professor Suresh Mari Selvam sir. Though you are moving on wheel, still you get connected, you organize, you are successful in organizing this program, connecting academia, experts, and the participants. And today you have thrown a light on, you are the competent person to talk about this subject, because you worked in UNDP, UNFPA, and DANIDA, and you are more fond of humanitarian supporter to the community at large. On behalf of the participant organizers, we thank you, sir, for making the day to happen.
I think we should listen to Professor Mari Selvam also.
Yeah,
You know,
sir. Concluding remarks from your side.
you're muted.
Thank you very much. It's the main focus of this program, as myself and Dr. Parivalan are talking about, since Julie Red Cross students are participating, and it's excellent to see that Dr. Priyadarshini has made an arrangement for the students to come and sit in the class so that they could. The same thing is happening in Hyderabad, it seems, because they could not get connected with the Zoom. I think that some part, I forgot the name of the college. They are using the YouTube and they are watching. That's why they are sending the questions, and it was well answered. They acknowledged it also. They have thanked. So I think the purpose of the session was served, and the students are getting the right kind of information as rightly Professor Menon was talking about, the social media is spreading different kinds of messages, and that should not create a confusion against India. So it was very clear about the causes and the humanitarian concerns. Thank you very much for Professor Menon and Dr. Parivelan for the timely support. Even Nandakishore could not join, and he has promised he will send his PPT, which could be uploaded in the YouTube. Please watch it when you get time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much from my side. This timely discussion on this very important theme, from disasters, climate to humanitarian concerns which this forum has. I'm very overwhelmed by your organizing. Thank you so much for all of you for picking up this theme and bringing in. I'm not claiming to be really the expert on this. Rather, it should have been Dr. Nandakishore who should have provided more geopolitical inputs. But I wanted to just cover the humanitarian aspect of it. But due to his absence, due to unavoidable conditions and some technical issues he had regarding internet, he posted as a message. So therefore, we have expanded a little more. We really missed his presence. We hope to have him sometime soon. That will also provide us more clear perspectives on what is going on and what are the causes. Thank you very much from my side to all of you.
Yeah, thank
for
you.
this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Savita and Dr. Priyadarshini and Professor Suresh Mariselvam, Mr. Suresh Kumar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Participant, kindly stay back. The feedback form will be uploaded. The chat box, please. Feedback form is now available. Kindly fill it and send. Participants, please refer chat box. Kindly fill feedback form. Sir Suresh Mariselvam, sir, shall we close the session?
Yes, sir, we can. The feedback forms have been floated, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Right. Thank you so much. Can close it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, sir. You who made the day to happen.
So we'll meet in another session on an important topic in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much.
At the outset, the global security is more important than anything else. This is the focus of the program. So on behalf of Disaster Resilient India 2030, collaborators, Auxilium College, Autonomous Vellore, Youth Red Cross Unit, Vellore District, and Shayappa College for Women, Nagercoil, and Disaster Management Rehabilitation Test. Close the session. Let us see. All the best. Thank you. Let us work for